And of course, a major target or factor that could drive that positive outlook is electricity and infrastructural development. We did hear earlier on the program, federal government's efforts to push the development of infrastructure, especially for electricity, through the subnationals. Let's look at a general view of Nigeria's status when it comes to electricity supply. We know for now that installed capacity is about 13,625 megawatts, but available capacity is just about 5,000, and that's 38% of installed capacity. And unfortunately, already this year, today is the second day in the month of February, but we've had 2 grid collapse already. So we have a long way to go to this target. The target by the Nigerian Independent System Operator is 8,500 for 2026, coming from 5,151 megawatts. Grid generation by the end of 26, that's what they are looking forward to, supported obviously by some of those funds given to the subnationals. Already, we've had on the 23rd and the 28th of January, grid collapse. And if you live in Nigeria, you must have seen that blackout. Now, a lot of people are talking about renewables and energy mix. For Nigeria at this time, gas is used for 75% of energy available. Hydro is 15%. Renewables, and that seems to be the one growing the most, is at 10% at this time. But there are challenges to this. Now, if we see that the majority of power produced in Nigeria is through gas, we still have gas supply constraints and gas pricing. A lot of manufacturers will say that. Aging infrastructure, especially at the generation and transmission parts of electricity, those are no longer news. We're still living with them. And then there's also something they say should help Nigeria, SCADA, I think they call it, Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition Platform. It's supposed to help monitor the supply and ahead of time get the system or personnel prepared against collapse. Then Nigeria still has to deal with vandalism of transmission lines and gas pipelines. Like as if it's not Nigerians that are carrying out this vandalism that we're talking about, as if they are not affected by the collapse and all of this power shortage. But I guess we have different mindsets, even though we're all Nigerians. Well, let's look for a way forward. We see the problem, we know it, we live with it, unfortunately. What is the way forward? We're speaking with Professor George Nwagu. He is a former head of PPP, that's Public-Private Partnership Division at the Federal Ministry of Finance here in Nigeria. He's also a professor right now. He's a professor at Stellenbosch University's Department of Mercantile Law and joins us from our Abuja studio. Professor George, good morning and welcome to the program. So we know the problems, and if you live in Nigeria, we know the problems already, and a lot of people are still scared of removal of electricity subsidy, and we know what that can do to prices, and the government said they can't sustain that anymore, so that's another thing. So a lot of people have said that a major challenge that has stopped the progress in Nigeria's electricity supply and generation is the tariff. It's not commensurate with the value or the capital that's needed. I know that you have done a whole lot in the area of PPP, finding a solution. How should we be handling this issue and finding a balance? Because already Nigerians are complaining of cost, and then there's the talk of removal subsidy, which of course will increase prices. How do we find a balance, and where do we go from here, Prof?
Thank you. That's a very important question, really. I think the first thing is to look back at what has happened. You know, the privatization that happened in 2013, and see what the issues are. What happened is so typically we call it privatization, but I really think that the sector was not fully privatized in 2013. And and that has led to a lot of issues. So if you look at the sector as it is, you'll see that the government continues to set tariff, and then the private sector is left with the risk of operations. So the private sector still carries operational risk. And then you have a contract. The private sector enters into a contract that is not fully implemented. The contracts are there, but a lot of times they're not fully implemented. So I'll give you an example. You have a situation where that contract has, it has performance obligations. For instance, the generation companies are mandated to produce a particular amount of power. And then, you raise financing to provide that power. And then, you are not paid agreed tariff for it. So that's a major problem. And the disconnect between the power that is generated and the tariff that is paid is a big issue. Government has agreed to take over, to continue to subsidize electricity. And historically, it's not been able to meet that obligation. And so we need to find a way to ensure that, the backlog in payments do not exist, because it's causing majority of the issues. The tariff, when the sector was privatized, the tariff was not cost reflective. You had infrastructure that was really poor, and government undertook to provide subsidies. Now, to remove those subsidies will, of course, increase what the citizens are going to pay. But if you look at the cost of what the average person pays for electricity now, if you factor in the cost of diesel and the cost of other means of generation, you will see that even at that, even when that tariff is removed, I think it will still be cheaper. So I think what people really want, what citizens really want, is power. They want access to power, and if they're going to be asked to pay for it, then they want to see that power. So if we provide power to citizens, they're not really going to, it won't be that much of a problem. And to round up this, my answer, I also believe that the more generation there is, the drop in the price of power, because like any other product, the more you produce, the more you produce, the lower the cost of production, and I think that will come into play. So if we let go of the hamstrings that are holding the power sector, which is government continue to hold tightly on the sector, and allow a bit the private sector, who have taken operational risk, to recover, I think that they're able to produce a lot more power, distribute a lot more power, and then the price of power will drop. That's my humble opinion.
Worse before it can get better. Because if we really want to attract this private sector with their money, then we have to do away with subsidy, which will mean it will get worse for Nigerians. But you're saying that if we follow that route, then at the end of the day, we could have more supply, which would also reduce prices at the end of the day in the long run.
sorry, can you come again, Ini? I didn't hear that very well.
Okay, so I was asking, are you telling Nigerians now that they should get prepared that if it should be better in the long run, it will first of all get worse? Because obviously to attract the private sector with their money, then the issue of subsidy has to be done away with, which would mean higher prices, tariffs for Nigerians. But you see that in the long run, it will get better.
So there are lots of things. So I honestly don't think that the prices will be that high. There are lots of inefficiencies in the system, also that needs to go. The first thing is, let me start with the simple issue of merit order of dispatch.
Okay.
So,
all right, Prof.
What
Prof,
it basically means
Prof,
is that,
please just hold your thoughts.
When
Prof,
you're dispatching power,
Professor Wangu,
the cheapest.
All right, Prof. Just hold your thoughts for a bit. I'll come back to you in just a few seconds. We have to tell our DSTV viewers now that it's a busy day in Adamawa State, Yola, the capital, because we're going to have a road commissioning and then there's a book launch. So that's for our DSTV viewers. We're leading you to Adamawa State for those activities. But on our other platforms, we're still here on Business Morning. And if you want to continue, you're watching on DSTV and you want to continue, please just go to our YouTube channel and then you see Business Morning right there. That's is for our DSTV viewers. Now, Prof, back to you, please. Do conclude your thoughts.
So I was saying that I don't think that when subsidy is removed, if subsidy is removed, that it would greatly increase the cost of power or the price of power. Because I'll tell you, we also need to do, there's a lot of inefficiency in the system. And we need to also look at those inefficiencies and remove them. The first one, I was talking about the merit order of dispatch. And so it simply means that when the system operator is dispatching power, that they should dispatch the cheapest available source of power. You will find, so the cheapest one is usually the hydros, then before the thermals come in, and so forth. So you find that this is not done, So so the weighted average cost of capital of power is still very high. So if that basic rule, for instance, was followed, I think it would drop the cost of the cost of power, and that is one. The second thing that needs to be done, apart from just removing subsidy, is you have to have fidelity to your contract. If where you sign contracts, for instance, investors need to be able to raise cheaper capital. They're not able to do that today because you can't go out and raise capital because the contracts are not being followed. They're not being paid on time. The terms of the contracts are not being met. So you need to meet that so that investors can actually borrow cheaper. And then I also think that, instead of the problem I have with subsidy at the operational level, is that it's a bit disorganized. If you want to provide subsidy, I believe that it should be provided as capex at the generation level. So what we have now is we provide the subsidy at the retail end of the market. But if you provide the subsidy during construction, at construction level, it means that the cost of construction will be less, far less, and it will mean that you provide that subsidy once. So when the power generation companies building their power plant, you give them the subsidy maybe instead of their cost of capital being 20%, for instance, and it's lowered at 5%, it means that at the end of the day, to produce that power, to build that plant, they spend far less. And if they spend far less, it means that the cost of power reduces. So there are certain things that we can do to ameliorate the problem. So I'm not saying that the citizens should just, buckle up and bear the cost of power. But I'm saying that we need a number of things. It's not just removing subsidy. There needs to be all of those little things that we need to do structurally, operationally, that can remove inefficiencies. We should do them as well. And at the end of the day, I really think that if there's going to be any marginal increase, it would not be a lot. That's my view.
So, Prof, the conversation around renewables is getting louder. We even hear of some Nigerians now who have done away with the national grid and depending just on renewables. Where does that fit in when we look at a national structure?
Okay, so and renewables have a lot of advantages, and it also has disadvantages. And when you say renewables, I know you're sticking to solar, but there are other renewables. Hydro is renewable as well, but I know you're speaking of solar. Now, the advantages of renewable is speed. You can, in a few months, literally, you can construct a solar plant, while a gas-fired plant or a hydro will take a longer period. You can renewables are also modular. You can basically put them together and scale in phases, and that's a very big advantage. And it's also easier to finance in terms of private sector financing right now. It's a lot easier. So yes, so they'll play a very, very important role. And if you see that a lot of the problem, when you were introducing this program, you talked about the grid failures. The major challenge are grid. And if renewables like solar can, you can do them off grid, of course, and you can use them for industrial clusters. So they do have a lot of advantages, and we need to use them, but they're also very intermittent in the sense that you can't use them for base load, in the sense that they're subject to weather patterns and all of that. You find that the availability factor is low compared to gas. You find that renewables some of them have below 50% availability factor because they're very intermittent. So you cannot solely rely on renewables. Of course, you can say that you can add battery storage and all of that to make them better, but you cannot rely on them. So what we should go for is an optimal energy mix that allows us use our God-given resource like gas. Nigeria is a gas country. We have gas. Gas is, we say that gas is our transition fuel. We should tap into it and use it wisely. And the policies around gas should be sorted. There are a lot of, these issues can be resolved. We should resolve the issues around gas. And then we should also then use gas where gas should be used for industrialization and whatnot. But then use the renewables for the rural areas where for instance, where the grid does not extend to. And, so renewables should be used to support what we're doing, but we shouldn't throw away gas or throw away other sources like hydro and then focus on renewables. It's not sustainable for the reasons I articulated, which is
All right.
intermittency.
All right, Prof, thank you so much for sharing those proposed solutions with us. Professor George Nwago is a former head PPP division at the Federal Ministry of Finance, is also currently a professor at Stellenbosch University's Department of Mercantile Law. Thank you so much for your time and your views.
Thank you for having me, Ini.
All right, let's take a break now. When we come back, we'll be heading to the creative economy. Something good happened last week. It's good to share good news. That's after the break. Please stay with us.